The young 14-year-old boy's impact on the civil rights movement. Now I'm going to have Joey talk about not necessarily a person, but a very significant event. An event you'll see is tied into some of the other presentations that we're going to see, but this is a very significant event. Well, you see that you're going to see the outcome of it, but there's some questions that you should have, especially me being in education, if this actually is being followed even today. I question whether it is, but this had to be done. At least have it legally that it couldn't have something but equal. So this does tie into our theme today. So I'm going to have Joey just kind of read about it a little bit, and then we'll again just cite a little quick 4 or 5 minute video just to help bring home the point of the significance of this court case. So if Joey can come up, give us a quick overview of the Brown v. Board of Education case, and we'll watch a quick summary of it. Go ahead.
One of the most historical court cases, especially in terms of education, was Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, 347 U.S. 483 in 1954. This case took on segregation within the school system, or the separation of white and black students within public schools. Until this case, many states had laws establishing separate schools for white students and another for black students. This landmark case made those laws unconstitutional. This decision was handed down May 17, 1954. It overturned the Plessy v. Ferguson decision of 1896, which had allowed states to legalize segregation within schools. The Chief Justice in the case was Earl Warren. His court's decision was a unanimous 9-0 decision that said separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. The ruling essentially led the way for the civil rights movement and essentially integration across the United States. The importance of this case. Brown versus Board set the foundation for the civil rights movement and gave African Americans hope that separate but equal on all fronts could be changed. The fight that followed after this ruling is not a pretty one. Many people lost their lives fighting for their rights and opportunities to live a free and completely equal and blended society. It was not an easy transition, and tension ran extremely high during these times. Today, schools are said to be melting pots. The intent of this landmark case was to open the doors of all schools to people across the United States. It was supposed to allow people of all color to have an equal opportunity to a free and public education no matter where they lived or what race there was. The original intent of this case has yet to be fulfilled.
All right, so let's kind of see a little bit.
By the early 50s, segregation was frayed by the war and torn in spots where the court had acted. The white primary was outlawed. Housing covenants outlawed. Some graduate and law schools were forced to admit blacks. But the court was aware that the big fight was still to come. The schools, K through 12, white children and black in the same classroom.
Southerners assumed that if grade school kids were in a desegregated setting, they'd get to know each other and they'd get to date each other and then they'd marry each other. And that was the strongest taboo that the South held.
Led by Thurgood Marshall and other young lawyers like Robert Carter, The NAACP Legal Defense Fund was running or aiding cases all over the country. The court picked 5 and consolidated them into one set of arguments, forever known as Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. As oral arguments approached, people camped outside the building to assure themselves a seat in the courtroom. NAACP lawyers Marshall and Carter were up against a formidable adversary, John W. Davis, a former presidential candidate making the last of his 140 appearances at the Supreme Court. But his arguments had a familiar ring. Separate wasn't necessarily unequal. Blacks should be happy with the way things were. Didn't states have the right to educate their children as they saw fit? When the 3 days of arguments were over, Davis was heard to remark, "I think we've got it won, 5-4, or maybe 6-3. The justices scheduled another hearing on the case, but before that could happen, Chief Justice Vincent died of a heart attack. President Eisenhower chose to nominate Earl Warren, formerly the governor of California. On May 17, 1954, there were signs. Some of the justices' wives showed up. Some clerks were tipped off. Then reporters rushed the courtroom.
Warren starts off in a bland manner, and you can't tell for a while as he's delivering the opinion what the outcome is going to be. And then he comes to the key line and he says, "And we unanimously hold that separate but equal has no place in the Constitution." And it was just electric in the courtroom when he said unanimous.
We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Therefore, we unanimously hold that the plaintiffs are deprived of the equal protection laws guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. Plessy v. Ferguson in education is no more, and in practice, Plessy v. Ferguson itself is no more. The era of Jim Crow, constitutionally speaking, is over.
This was precisely what we urged them, almost in that language. So it was gratifying to have the opinion come down almost in the language of the argument that we made to them.
In 1951, I'd used a plain geometry book that had been used by a white student in 1935. Brown said that that was over. The hand-me-down tubas that I played in the high school band from the white high schools, it said to me that that was ended. And it said to me that at some point, I would not have to travel from Atlanta to Greencastle in Indiana to get an undergraduate degree. That my family, my cousins, my neighbors could go to Georgia Tech and to the University of Georgia. The Supreme Court decision of 1954 was for me the Magna Carta. It was the second emancipation. It was a great moment.
Okay. Let's go to the next 2 slides. I'm gonna skip that one. Go to the next one. Thanks. All right, so after that case, the hearing and the case, and after that event, about a year later is when Emmett Till's death occurred. So all these things happened around the same time, mid to late 1950s. So now Brown versus Board said, you're right, no more separate but equal. So now we're going to look at now what was the effects of that. So right away, caused a firestorm in the country. And young people had to step up and deal with the issue of busing. So we're going to see a group called the Little Rock Nine. And you're going to hear Yara Kadesi going to read about what they had to endure. And then we're going to read about a young girl, right around the age Gabby is now, a 6-year-old girl named Ruby Bridges, and what she had to deal with right after Brown vs. Board had passed. So, ladies, you can come up, give us an overview of Little Rock 9, who they were, what they had to endure, and then after that, after the short video, Gabby and Alexis, they're going to come up and tell us about Ruby Bridges. Okay, so these events occurred right after, maybe 4 or 5 years, or even less, after Brown vs. Board was passed.
After the Supreme Court's decision in the Brown v. Board of Education court case in 1954, the Little Rock 9 School Board announced its intention of complying with the federal constitutional requirements. This requirement was the integration of blacks and whites in the same schools. This was a big controversy, especially in the South. The school administrators didn't expect there to be a problem when the 9 black students were to be integrated into Little Rock Central High. Though the night before their first day, Governor Orval Faubus announced on statewide television that it would not be possible to restore or maintain order if the foreseeable integration were to take place. The next morning, he ordered the National Guard to surround this high school, not to let the students enter. Shortly after, the NAACP turned to the federal district court, where Judge Ronald Davis ordered that the integration of Central High was to occur. The next day, September 4th, the 9 students were arranged to be driven in 2 police cars to the school. The students were once again not allowed into the school and returned home safely. But one 15-year-old, Elizabeth Eckford, did not get the message. She didn't have a phone. When she arrived at the school, she was met by a National Guardsman who did not let her in. She was forced to walk 100 yards to the bus stop, on her way followed by a mob threatening to kill her and cursing at her. Eckford said, "I tried to see a friendly face somewhere in the mob, someone who may be able to help me. I looked into the face of an old woman and she seemed to have a kind face. But when I looked at her again, she spat on me." The 9 students were to stay at home for more than 2 weeks, where they tried to keep up with their schoolwork the best they could. The federal court ordered Governor Faubus to stop interfering with the court's orders, and Faubus removed the guardsmen from the front of the school.
On September 23rd, the 9 entered the school for the first time. The crowd outside chanted, 2, 4, 6, 8, we ain't gonna integrate. They also chased and beat the black reporters covering the story. The Little Rock police were fearful that they could not control the increasingly unruly mob in front of the school and removed the 9 students later that morning. They once again returned home and waited for more information as to when they would be able to go back to school. The next day, Little Rock Mayor Woodrow Mann requested that federal troops be sent in. President Eisenhower agreed, and on September 25th, the 9 students were escorted to the school in a convoy that included armed soldiers and jeeps with machine gun mounts. A helicopter and 350 paratroopers from the U.S. Army's 101st Airborne Division met them at the school. For the rest of the year, the 9 black students attended school with this military protection, but the Army troops could only protect them outside of the school. Inside the school, they were repeatedly attacked, both physically and verbally, by other students. So much, in fact, that one of them, Minnie Jean Brown, was expelled after she dumped a bowl of chili on some of the boys who had harassed her. Finally, 2 soldiers from the 101st Airborne were assigned to each of the students. The other 8 students stayed at Central until the end of the school year. On May 27, 1958, Ernest Green became the first black to graduate from Central. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to the graduation ceremony. Green later told reporters, "It's been an interesting year. I've had a course in human relations firsthand. The other 8, like their counterparts across the district, were forced to attend other schools or take correspondence classes the next year when voters had chosen to close all 4 of Little Rock's high schools to prevent any more desegregation efforts."
Okay. Just look at